It's been a satisfying and mind-bending first season of my podcast of It's About Language. I started It's About Language as a podcast with the first episode in September 2020 because I really wanted to stay in contact with the many wonderful friends, colleagues, and professionals that I knew around the country and the world. And this year I've made so many new connections. And why language? Well, in my own personal history, my dad was a refugee immigrant from Croatia. He had a lot of learning to do when he came to the United States. He's a very intelligent man, ended up loving language, loving words. And I ended up learning from him how to love words and language too. And then when I visited my family in Croatia, I got the cultural exposure to a world that doesn't exist very much. Small village life, different kinds of approaches to the understanding of resources and community and relationships. I turned out to be an accidental educator when language that I had enjoyed just as a hobby opened the door to exactly where I needed to be. And then I got a chance, real opportunity to review others' good work in writing for world languages, and then got a chance to write my own materials where others helped me to make it as good as it could be. But especially I've loved language because it brings me into the midst of the lives of young people and educators, human beings worldwide, and especially educators who are seeking an impact as teachers, mentors, trainers, and colleagues. So I'm going to provide this first season retrospective in two parts. This podcast today is what the world out there, outside the classroom, has to say about aspects of language in life and work. The next podcast, the last one for this first season, will be a look into the hearts, minds, and hopes of language educators as they prepare young people for this very needy world. I'm going to have a chance today to listen to 10 out of the 48 folks that I have interviewed on my podcast. There's so many more. Please check out my website, fluency.consulting, to see all of the podcasts and to check out the biographies of the folks that you'll be listening to today, as well as others. Listen to those podcasts. So let's get started. In my work over the years, and especially when I'm focusing on these podcasts, I've been noticing the kinds of patterns that we need to think of when we're talking about language, patterns that help us to understand the extraordinary and unique role that language plays for us as humans. I've developed a concept that I call the DNA of language, because language is alive, always changing, always morphing, and always new in the mouths of its speakers, both native and non-native. In the DNA of language, there's an ongoing double helix of life, but there are three anchor points in the DNA I call identity, belonging, and impact. And one of the first things that happened when having these podcasts was recognizing over and over the role of identity in the lives of educators and those using language in various ways around the world. That identity. So we're going to start with Patrick Moynihan, episode 26. Patrick is a deacon in the Roman Catholic Church. He's a philanthropist, nonprofit institutional development advisor, and the president emeritus of the Haitian Project. Listen as Patrick talks about the nature of language as identity, where we can embrace our infancy in new language, embrace it to bring about the humility that can help us to serve better in the world.
But if you're going to accompany people, if you're going to work with people, you need to understand what they actually want you to do for them, because service is doing what they want, not what I want to do as service, right? And so by going there with no language ability, I had to become a child. and grow up in that society. And so when I say I had a deuxième naissance, and which is a combination of Creole and French to some degree, deuxième naissance, when I had that, then that birth really confirmed for me, and I think it kept me from making a lot of mistakes that I otherwise would have made, that we often make in going somewhere to help somebody. And we have a lot of words for that: white saviorism, all kinds of it's a neo-colonialism, all kinds of things, because there is a reality to that. But having to be reborn in Haiti and rely on other people like a child relies on parents so that I could get the language, so I could get to a level of communication, I think that helped me not make the mistake of overstepping my role.
There are so many things I appreciated with my conversation with Pat Moynihan, but that sense of humility touched me in particular. So many times we're afraid about our identity. Pat provided an opportunity for us to discuss the nature of language giving us permission to be vulnerable again, especially vulnerable in front of those with whom we want to make connections. And here we take a look at, too, is how do we think of ourselves? My next guest is Michael Leibowitz, episode 44. Michael is the founder of Mind Magnetizer. How's that for a great company name? You can find him at mindmagnetizer.com. The conversation with Michael was about meaning, how we find meaning. Now, because he works with companies, it's about companies finding meaning and identity, but it also is about us, as you'll hear when you listen to the podcast. As you listen to this excerpt, think to yourself, when he refers to brand, we can think about personal identity. When he refers to customer, we can think about all those that are around us in our families, friends, community, schools, workplaces. What kind of meaning do we find? What is our identity in the world? How do we express that identity to others? Listen as Michael has a very interesting insight to share in this excerpt.
We relate to and make sense of our world based on our beliefs. Yes. So when you go out there and communicate from the viewpoint and on the level of your beliefs, it is like a lighthouse to every other person out there who shares the same beliefs you do. So when they hear it, 100 people might do the exact same thing you do. But if you communicate on belief level, right, whatever belief is operating there, the people who share that same belief, suddenly all the other ones go away because our nervous system notices this connection. And we feel this as resonance and attraction. It's just how we work.
So isn't that fascinating? The idea that we develop meaning in our lives, it is part of our identity, and then we express it to others. But do we always know the meaning of our lives? Have we thought about how we express it? Michael Leibowitz is one of the first podcast things you'll be listening to today that have to do with that awareness that we bring to the language that we speak about ourselves as well as about the world. And in fact, the next excerpt is going to be from Arthur Padilla, episode 28, on uncovering unconscious bias. Arthur is senior managing partner for Strategy Works, and he specializes in community development. His history, as well as his conversation, is fascinating. So when you have a chance to listen to Arthur's excerpt, recognize that our biases, our unconscious biases, become invisible because sometimes we haven't even defined ourselves to others, as well as thought about the role that others play in our minds. And he introduces for us today the concept that comes up over and over and over again the importance of storytelling. Let's listen to Arthur Padilla.
Well, I think for me, the thing that's fundamental for this particular issue is that people feel pain around bias. People feel an emotional response to being or having bias. And when it's unconscious, when we don't even know we're doing it, and yet people are blaming us, it probably feels more painful than before. I don't feel the pain so much anymore because I'm used to being called on my stuff. And over time, you get a little thicker skin. But in the early years, it's hard. It's hard. And bias is complicated when it's unconscious and we don't even know it exists. That is, all of these are layers of how do I dig into there and find the bias and how do I get people to understand it? The truth is, for me, it's storytelling. It really is storytelling. It's being able for people to be able to speak and say their story. And a lot of that has to do with relating experience. It's hard to relate our experiences to each other than through storytelling. And I find it one of the most effective ways for us to have conversations about unconscious bias. It's like, okay, let's talk about that. What's the story? When was the last time you experienced it that you could acknowledge that someone was treating you that way?
Notice Arthur here is entering now into that second part of the DNA of language that I was talking about, the part where we belong. Once we have recognized that we have an identity of some kind, our next basic human need, after we've survived to have an identity, is to belong. Humans are social creatures, thus language. Notice that Arthur Padilla introduces the concept of storytelling to uncover bias and also to make those connections and to attempt to overcome any kinds of divisions that we might inadvertently have because of the language that we use, either inside our own head or out in public. The next person that you're going to listen to is from episode 31, Ashwini Prasad. Ashwini is the host of the podcast, The Inclusive Screenwriter. A screenwriter in Southern California, Ashwini has written a book about screenwriting, providing inclusive language so that not only are people reflected in those films and media, but also in the language and the cultural settings in which they are found. Let's take a listen to Ashwini as she again talks not only about the importance of inclusion, the importance of understanding how everyone gets a chance to belong, but how to go about doing that.
Well, I think it's, one thing that I have, because I talk about this in like different writers groups, is should we be using certain words? Because one, they are part of someone's culture. And we had a really deep conversation a couple of weeks back with a writing group I'm a part of. And, we were talking about Spike Lee and the words he uses in the movie that he directs. And one, I definitely am somebody who's like, I am not here to tell any culture what they can and cannot say. I think what's important for somebody like me who's an outsider of certain cultures is if I am writing something, one, I need to get permission. I need to make sure I'm well researched so that I know I'm portraying something accurately, because I am of write what you know, research the rest. And thirdly, I would say, being able to ask the question to yourself, is it necessary? Can you portray the same emotion, the same thing you want to say in a different way that's not maybe stereotypical or derogatory?
As a person that works to ensure that language is not only clear in itself, but engages and connects so that people feel that they belong and have purpose, Arthur Padilla and Ashwini Prasad's conversations really touched me deeply. I've gone back myself to listen to them many times. That unconsciousness becoming more conscious and repaired, that work with research to provide for inclusion, that sensitivity to the power of language. That's what the world has that we can share and that we can bring back into classrooms to make students aware that it's not just what they say, but how they say it, why they say it, the words they choose, the sensitivity with which they come, and that openness, as we heard again from Pat Moynihan, to being young in language and open to humility. We then morph, blend really, from belonging to the idea of impact. The next guest you're going to listen to is from episode 29, Dan Goodwin. Dan Goodwin is the founder of CYA Consulting, and his focus is on corporate investigations. Dan has a lively and interesting approach to the role of language and talks some interesting stories that I think you'll enjoy when you listen to the podcast about how language is used in investigative ways, but also extremely respectful ways. And indeed, this excerpt you're about to hear is Dan speaking about the importance of clarity of language to show respect for others, to improve our relationships, and to provide the kind of impact, the positive impact that we want.
So what have I seen? What have I experienced? Do people use big words that they know others will not understand? That means that they are not practicing great communication skills to communicate to their target audience. Now, it may be an education situation where you take the time to break a complex subject down. It may be a technical briefing where when you see people's eyes glazing over, you are not communicating to them. And we've all sat there and done this, right? It could be the use of jargon. So we talked at the top of this interview, we talked about 3-letter acronyms. We talked about business language. We need to make sure that we have broken this content down into something that's understandable. Now, there is a balance, Norah, between knowing your audience and then expecting your audience to be up to speed on the briefing that they're invited to be at. If you keep getting interrupted by that one person says, I'm sorry, I don't understand that. I'm sorry, I don't understand that. Can you clarify that for me? Those are valid questions. It would depend upon what level of meeting you were in. And I've seen this pressed down, the weaponization of words. I've seen this used gender. I've seen this used race, microaggressions. And I'm not sure, I am not the expert to talk on microaggressions, okay? I'm just telling you right now. But I'm telling you that the words that are used in order to make one feel less than, that is a problem. There is a way to communicate with respect to a human person that doesn't have to include the put down.
And this is another moment in which going out into the world where language is part of everyday work, of everyday interaction, really helps reflect back to the tribe that I've come from. So I love the thoughtful philosophical things we've been discussing in this particular part. Now we're going to move more in this impact into specifics about how language is used in the world. And my guest, Matt Bailey, we had so much to talk about questioning that we made 2 podcasts out of it, episodes 35 and 36. Matt is marketing consultant and trainer for major corporations around the world. His skill set in making data come to life to understand how to work with it puts him in the middle of language all of the time. And he connected up with me so that we could have a conversation about how we formulate and use questions and why questions are of critical importance. Let's listen to Matt about understanding how questions work and about formulating them and using them in the world.
I mean, I think it's easy as a previous employer to say, I want students who can express themselves better through writing and through speaking. Those are two skills that when I talk to other employers, other agencies, it's very difficult to find anymore. Because even in business, and this is starting to take hold, and I'm so happy to see that, is that I'll teach you the skills I want you to have. But the intangibles are your ability to communicate. And we call that the soft skills. And there is a trend right now to hiring soft skills, people that can communicate, that can capture people's attention, that have excellent writing skills. Great, because those are harder to teach. They're harder to instill. And now when it comes to optimizing a website, I can teach you that because you have demonstrated capabilities of reaching a level of understanding that it will be very easy for you to really integrate what I would call more tactical, discipline-related content. That's the trend that's happening right now in business. And I wish that would filter into the schools, is not just these facts and figures. That's not going to do it. It's your ability to present. It's your ability to persuade. It's the more rhetorical approach that you had described of, I'm asking you questions that helps you synthesize the information, which now enables you to ask better questions. That's what employers are begging for right now.
That's what employers are begging for right now. The ability to use language well in speaking and writing. Matt even refers in another part of the podcast to the art of persuasion and the importance of that. This is critical for us to know when we're out in the world, critical for us to develop as part of the impact of language on our lives and the lives of others, and certainly how we look in an educational setting and what we do to train students to not only know, again, what to say, but how to say it. Now, we're going to add to that too. The next excerpt is going to come from Jill Bishop, episode 42. Jill Bishop is the founder and CEO of Multilingual Connections, translation, interpretation, transcreation. A Spanish teacher by background herself, Jill was insightful about the need for not only accuracy of language, not only accuracy of writing and speaking, as Matt Bailey has referred to, but also the importance of understanding the cultural nuances. These are things that all play a part in classrooms, but let's watch and listen to Jill Bishop expressing how this works with the very specific work that's done with interpretation, translation, and transcreation.
It's certainly something that's growing in importance as everyone's trying to do more business globally. You need to really think about something that you would take for granted, your marketing messages. You need to understand, is this something that will people care about it? Will they understand it? Will it resonate with them? Will it move them to action or move them to feel something? And so that's where you really need to take the time to understand the culture and not just the language of your target. And so to students in language classes today, their opportunities are translating from the language they're studying into English or transcribing from that language into English. And so the more you know your own language in terms of, spelling, grammatical issues, orthography, all of that is important. Formatting is so important, but understanding the culture and the cultural equivalence. And so what we take as given is very different in other countries and other cultures. And so you have to still get to that same level of cultural understanding so that you can render that original content in your own language. So you need the language skills, but you really need to understand the culture and what people are doing with language in those countries and be able to figure out a way to replicate that in your own language.
So, what Jill Bishop brings to us here is that if we want to move people to action, did you notice? If we want to move them in spirit, that we need to be understanding the culture as well as the words. Both are needed in order to move others to action and to feeling. This is striving to use language with conscious application that goes far beyond just the structure, but into the emotional impact that language plays with all of us because of our use of language as part of our identity and as part of the way that we belong. So now this impact comes from understanding the culture and the language, as has shared Jill Bishop. We're now going to turn to Robert Pizzini. Robert Pizzini is episode 30. Robert is a 26-year Navy veteran and now the CEO and managing partner of I Fly Virginia Beach Indoor Skydiving. Robert puts together regularly leadership courses and opportunities for those who would like to grow their leadership skills, make transformative experiences happen in their companies, in their groups. And he does so by reflecting on what is the meaning of leadership? What words do we use? What language do we use? And what culture is engaged in leadership and teams working together? Let's listen to Robert Pizzini.
I think that leaders are always learning, and storytelling can only be done if leaders reflect on their experiences. And if they've done enough deep reflection, there's a lot of value that people can pull out of those experiences. So if people are metacognitive, if they think very deliberately about what they've learned along the way, then they have something very valuable to share with others. And it's a very deliberate process, though. And unfortunately, I think most of us don't do that. And those that do it have something very valuable to share with others. I think that people should have a deliberate process. And, as I discuss the art of leadership and the science of leadership, I talk about my deliberate process. And for the art, for example, my deliberate process is first to have my own personal definition of the word leadership. And then I build upon that with leadership styles that I'm comfortable with and I think I'm good with, and power types that I use to good effect. And when I say good effect, that's for the good of the team. So again, I think that people have to have a foundation. That foundation has to be built on something. For me, it's defining leadership and reminding myself of that definition every single day. That way I know if I'm leading or if I'm doing something other than leading. And then once again, leadership styles, power types, and then something else that I call critical traits. So having this deliberative process, I think, is critical to being the most effective leader you can be for the greatest amount of people over the longest duration of time.
Robert Pizzini again refers to storytelling. And we're all leaders, or can be leaders in our families, leaders in our schools, leaders in our communities, leaders in any number of kinds of groupings. We all can step into that role. You notice that Robert talks about defining that. That is to say, thinking about the language that we use and telling the story to ourselves and to others in ways that can be understood, as we have heard from the other guests excerpted today. So when we turn then and bring the impact into the world in however we wish to define leadership, what is one of the most important ways that we can do it? Defining, yes. Practicing, yes. Thinking about how we communicate clearly and writing and speaking and persuasively, yes. Understanding the culture, yes. And here now is Jackie Merritt. Excerpt from episode 48. Jackie Merritt is Gallup Senior Workplace Consultant and Executive Coach. The Gallup organization, the one that does those polls that we're all familiar with and the research that undergirds so much of our understanding of society, has an opportunity for the coaches to bring the insights of the research into the lives of leaders and those of us that are interested in growing personally in our strengths in the world. I've been very, very honored that Jackie has been my own personal coach as I've developed my Gallup coaching business. Jackie provides a new way of thinking about leadership that complements every part that we've addressed so far. But listen, as Jackie brings in the next aspect of the impact of language and the impact of leadership.
I think that what I hear out in the world is that listening is the new leadership. Listening is not only important for leaders, but it's also important on the home front. And that we've kind of stopped listening to each other. And we're doing a lot of talking over each other right now. And I think the state of our politics and, some of the issues that we're facing in the US in particular can be traced back to our challenge with listening and hearing each other speak. And so it's a competency that we learn in coaching. It's something that we spend a lot of time on. There's techniques. We try to get better at it. And, if I could wish for one thing in our school system, it would be that we teach kids how to listen better. And I think they do in some school systems, so I don't want to say that they don't, but they certainly didn't in mine. One technique, and people probably have heard of this one before, because I think they use it. Somewhere I heard it called the Indian talking stick or something like that. But
okay.
Anyway, it's after somebody speaks, repeat back what you heard using the same words, like mirror it back at them, just to check in with them that you heard what you think you heard. Because I think the challenge is that our brains kind of make things up based on our own biases and experience. So, if you think about like sound comes into our ears and it really doesn't have any meaning at that point. And we're trying to make meaning of it. So that signal is trying to connect with something in our brain that makes sense and that feels kind of like similar to what we already know. So it kind of has a place to live in our brain. And we tend to actually reject things that don't fit in our framework, our biases, our experiences, our paradigms. So it's almost as if we're listening for what we want to hear naturally. So there's always a little gap between what we hear and what was said. And so to close that gap, just repeating back to somebody simply, hey, I heard you say that was really challenging for you. Or I heard you use the word struggle when you were talking about that issue, just like really simply feeding it back to them, because what that does is it allows them to either confirm that, validate that, or expand on that.
Interesting, isn't it? The listening and the techniques of listening, which can be practiced in our lives and practiced in our educational institutions, are actually pulling together the humility, the meaning, the inclusion, the clarity, the questioning, the cultural nuances that we're trying to pick up and understand of each other into a conscious application. Being there for one another, listening, being prepared to take on leadership, being prepared to reach out and serve. All of those things are based in language that we share with one another. This last excerpt is from the producer of my podcast, Charles Volk, episode 46. Chaz set up Mr. Thrive Media as a way of opening doors for his companions in the media industry in Southern California when they needed new routes to be heard, to find their own language, to find their own lives of freedom. Being there for one another through understanding language and culture and applying those leadership skills. Let's Listen to this excerpt from Chaz Volk's episode 46.
And in the same way that I fail every day on an entrepreneurial level, there have been plenty of times I have failed trying to productively express myself. Again, I'm not going to hide that. And I think everyone, at least once in their life, has failed to productively express themselves at a high emotional state. I can only say that it takes time and practice, and I think having a good therapist that is there for you, or at least something in your life that acts as a therapist, whether it's a friend or a family member or even an activity, having the proper outlet and having the proper resource to kind of guide that direction is incredibly imperative. And I would also say that, making sure that you surround yourself with people that are better than you at expressing themselves is really the best way to grow into a proper and productive narrative. Because those mentors, those who have really leaned into that narrative, are those who have also failed just like you. They have failed many more times than you, and that's why they are an applicable mentor. But they wouldn't be applicable if they had failed less than you and they were trying to give you advice. And that's why you need to spend time with those who have.
How about that, huh? We started out with humility and we end up with celebrating failure, but because we use language to express it to one another, because we listen, because we tell stories to one another, because we're aware that we have unconscious biases, we begin to name those things. We also name our leadership qualities. I hope that these excerpts have given you, like they've given me, an idea of the power of language to have the key role of our identity, of our belonging, and of our impact in the world, including in leadership roles in whatever aspect of our lives that we express ourselves. Bringing in that humility, bringing in that respect, bringing in that listening, bringing in that sensitivity. Language is the human expression. And when we bring the power of the positive nature that we can practice, as these guests in using language in so many varied ways have shown us today, we can make the change for the better in our world. Language is the key. Language is how we connect. Language is how we're going to be able to turn around the disconnect, the anger, and the misunderstanding and turn it into the positive, powerful, connecting experience that language can be quintessentially. So, thanks for listening to this podcast. Go and listen to those various episodes, please, and to others. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you in retrospective number 2, the way that educators take a look at the world language experience inside the classroom and its impact in their students' lives. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please share it and follow our socials at fluency_consulting. Check out my website, fluency.consulting, for more information on this guest and all my guests. And please donate, as it makes it possible for me to create and share these podcasts. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.